On today's episode of Dance Med Spotlight, I'm speaking with Monika Saigal, a registered dietitian nutritionist and the author of this new book, Nourishing Dance. In today's episode, we talk about some of the different topics like fueling and underfueling, disordered eating and eating disorders, things that we need to be aware of in the dance space. We also talk about, and this is discussed in the book as well, some of the terminology and vocabulary that we're using, understanding what it means and maybe how we're misusing certain words, acknowledging biases that we may have when it comes to eating and nutrition, body image, all of those different kinds of things, and a lot of other topics. Beyond that, in this episode, you also get to learn a lot about some of the different topics and sort of features of the book. So it's a great preview to see what all is in here and learn more. Make sure, no matter who you are within the dance space, whether you are a dancer, someone supporting a dancer, or a healthcare provider supporting a dancer, there is going to be some information for you learning how to nourish dance. Welcome back to another episode of Dance Med Spotlight, where we talk about all things dance medicine and dance science. Today, I am super excited for my guest, Monika Saigal. She is a registered dietitian nutritionist, certified eating disorder specialist, and former professional dancer, as well as author of this fabulous book, Nourishing Dance, which we will be talking more about as well as we go along. So welcome, Monika.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So Monika, my very first question for each of my guests is essentially what brought you to this point doing what you do within the dance space, and sort of the short story version of it.
Not the 17-year plus version.
Right.
I think like most of us who go into this dance medicine, dance wellness field, as you mentioned, my first career was as a professional dancer. And I think, like many of us, what I do now was inspired by issues I saw as a dancer and wanting to fill gaps that I saw in my own training and career. Unfortunately, I had a pretty short injury-plagued professional dance career. And when I was thinking about what I was going to do next, I knew I wanted to stay involved with dancers and the dance community. I never really felt like teaching or choreography was my calling. I had always been really interested in science, kind of debated nutrition or PT for a while, but ultimately nutrition felt like the better fit. And I often talk about how in, my own training in a studio in New Orleans, where I'm from, I went to a performing arts high school. I majored in ballet performance in college, and then I danced professionally. I actually never had any nutrition education. And so initially that was, I think the main motivating factor was to provide that piece. And after I went back to school to get my master's in clinical nutrition, I mostly started out working one-on-one with dancers, providing nutrition counseling, and then little by little providing nutrition education workshops for dancers. And the more that I did that work, and also along the way, I became a specialist in eating disorders, which I think is so key in terms of working with this really vulnerable population. But as I was working more one-on-one with dancers, it just became so clear to me how important it was to address the environment, that it's only going to go so far in terms of providing dancers with education and tools and support around nutrition and body image if we're not also addressing the things in their environment that make it hard for dancers to nourish and care for themselves. And so over time, a lot more of my work has been in working with dance schools, companies, organizations around also providing education and training to dance educators and leadership and health professionals who work with dancers, and also providing consulting around like wellness initiatives, eating disorder policies and protocols, that kind of work, which I'm really grateful for. I think changing the culture is a big part of helping dancers be healthier.
Mm-hmm. And I think you hit on a really important point there of it's not just about providing education or training or whatever to the dancers themselves, but also talking about that environment and the people that they're around and who are supporting them and that sort of thing. And one of the things that I really appreciate about some of the information in your book as well, where, some of these sections you say, okay, well, if you're a healthcare provider, this is how you can support, or, ways that we can screen dancers for some of this information. If you're an educator, here's some language that you can be mindful of when you're speaking in class or speaking to dancers individually. And so I love that you have it sort of laid out like that. So no matter who is reading this, they can go, oh, here's the information that's a helpful way for me to frame it for my context working with the dancer.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that. I think that, there are definitely some things that across the board apply to everyone, dancers, parents, healthcare professionals, dance educators, but also, unique needs dependent on your role. And so I did try to kind of give the broader strokes and also the more specific tools and guidance. So people really come away from the book with some action steps of what they can do.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I also love in here is how you start off right off the bat discussing some of the terminology that's used. And I think some of them are things that we don't necessarily think about automatically. One of those is this idea of using the term healthy when we're discussing eating and nutrition. Talk a little bit more about that with me.
Yeah, I think the word healthy has gotten very warped in our society and the dance world, I think. And unfortunately, we use that term often to describe things that are really not healthy at all, whether it's, restrictive or compensatory eating habits or, punishing relationship with exercise. And also this very kind of Eurocentric, one size fits all approach to nutrition and health that does not account for how different what's healthy is going to be for one person to the next, one dancer to the next. And I think, really evaluating the messages that we're exposed to, diet culture messaging that we're so engulfed in it that we often don't even question whether it might be problematic. And so I think that's really important to sort of pause, zoom out, see where those messages come from, and decide, is this something that's healthy for me? Is this something that's healthy, in the big picture? When I speaking specifically about healthy eating, when I'm talking about healthy eating, I am referring to not just getting the nutrients you need, but also cultivating a peaceful relationship with food and your body, being able to eat in a way that's not just nourishing, but also enjoyable, that's flexible, so dancers can adapt it to whatever situation they're in, and really trying to unlink the way that we eat from trying to change and manage body size. I think that's a lot of where the unhealthy aspects of the word healthy come from.
Mm-hmm. I know growing up as a dancer, whether it was, things that I was hearing in class, seeing with friends, or just, again, kind of seeing just in the community as a whole, there were a lot of not great ideas of what healthy was or how you should eat, or even terms that sometimes would be used by instructors, things like, you shouldn't eat certain sorts of foods, or, like the studio I grew up at, we were really close to a convenience store and a Taco Bell. And so it made it super easy to just run and grab a bag of chips and a soda during a break or something like that. And it's like, oh, you shouldn't be eating that. Why are you eating that? And so, all of those little messages and little things are things that definitely stick with you, regardless of if you're continuing on with a dance career or not.
Absolutely. I mean, I think two points to what you said. The first is that any of these dichotomous approaches to food of we should eat this, shouldn't eat this. This is healthy, this is unhealthy. This is good, this is bad. This is clean, this is toxic. Are super inaccurate and very unhelpful, generally harmful. It does not account for, one, how nuanced nutrition is, and two, again, how individual what works for one person is going to be. For some dancers, eating more fruits and vegetables is a great tip. For other dancers, that is not going to be promoting of health because they need other nutrients more, and maybe it's feeding into more of a disordered mindset around food. And so I think it's really important to challenge those things. Also thinking about when dancers hear messages, language around food that's so judgmental, like what you're saying, you shouldn't be eating that. Are you sure you want to eat that? Are you really going to have that right before rehearsal? Those messages do really stick and can be enduring, as you said. And I think that that's one of another reason that I wrote the book is that when we think about how many people experience dance training versus how many people go on to dance professionally, it is a minuscule amount that are going on to dance professionally. And the harmful things dancers are exposed to in a dance environment in society, those things last a lifetime. Those are people who then have kids and they're basing their decision on what type of dance, if they're going to have their kids dance at all. Those are people who become audience members, potentially donors, maybe healthcare professionals who work with dancers. And those experiences really do, impact long term.
Definitely. One of the things that you talk about that I think is a really important piece for people to understand is thinking about how dancers are fueling and what it means to under fuel as well. Let's maybe talk about first that idea of what is under fueling.
Yeah, so I think about underfueling in a few different ways. It can be underfueling in terms of energy, and so you're not consuming enough energy or calories to support what your body needs for not only dancing and exercise, but everything else your body has to do in day-to-day life, normal body functioning, etc. And you can also underfuel in terms of specific nutrients. So you could be perhaps consuming enough energy, but you're not consuming enough carbohydrates. That's one of the nutrients I see that's most problematic among dancers because of all of the unfair, villainization and fear mongering around that nutrient. You can also be under consuming micronutrients. So a dancer might be fueling well in terms of energy and timing throughout the day, but maybe they're not consuming enough calories. And so there are a lot of different kind of formats in terms of underfueling. Also timing. So you could be maybe in the course of the day, what I see a lot with dancers is that based on schedules, hunger levels, planning, timing, all of that stuff, often, they're not eating enough in the morning and during dance, and sometimes making up for that at night. And so maybe in the course of 24 hours, you're consuming enough energy, but you're in an underfueled state for much of the day. We call that within day energy deficiency. And that can still have really detrimental impacts. So we're basically looking at energy, macronutrients, micronutrients, and timing when we're talking about underfueling and wanting to address all of those aspects.
Mm-hmm. One of the things there too, I see a lot with dancers, especially young dancers, where, maybe they're in school all day and then they're dashing off to the studio and they're dancing, sometimes 4, 5+ hours a night.
Yeah.
And sometimes the way that they're scheduled with their classes, there isn't really time to get a meal in there, much less a snack or something like that. And so a lot of times some of the dancers, they try eating something after school and then they're not consuming anything again until they get home later in the evening. What might be some thoughts to consider and or recommendations for dancers with that kind of scheduling challenge?
Yeah, it's really tricky. I feel like that's where if it's accessible for dancers, meeting one-on-one with a dietitian who can really kind of look at your situation and help you strategize for your specific schedule and circumstances can be really helpful. I know that is not accessible for everyone. I think that this is where like sports drinks and easy to digest during dance fueling can be really helpful. And the kind of adjunct to that is ideally, this is, if we're saying what we're doing for each category, for young dancers who parents are playing a big role in terms of, helping them pack lunches or providing them with food, making sure that you have lots of easy to digest snacks and things on hand and helping make sure they're packing their dance bag with non-perishable things, sports drinks, applesauce packets, those kinds of things that they can pop in a few dry fruit, like between classes and rehearsal. Even if you have, 5 minutes to go to the bathroom, you can have some sports drink. The other part of that is dance educators. I really think, again, talking about a culture shift, when I'm working with schools and companies, the scheduling of breaks is something that often comes up, that if we're really trying to train healthy dancers, it's probably better that they get 10 or 15-minute breaks a couple times during, 4 to 5 hours of dancing versus like that extra 10 or 15 minutes of class or rehearsal when we're looking at, longevity and strength and creativity and all of these other things we're trying to cultivate. And I think also normalizing that, something that's hard in the dance environment, that you had said earlier, and I experienced this too as a dancer, is we're so influenced by what the people around us are doing. And so when no one else is fueling during rehearsals, it can be really hard to be the one person who's like, no, I need to eat my snack, or I'm going to, whip out my Gatorade or applesauce, which is where I think the education piece can be really helpful too, so that dancers know what to do. They can encourage each other in proper fueling, and that the dance environment is also doing the same thing.
Yeah, I know even personally. So I still dance. I still compete in swing dancing. And something that I learned a little while back with a dietitian that I was working with was for these days where I'm competing, sometimes 24 dances in, a single day. Having like little energy bites, and then I have a bottle with electrolyte water, and then I have something that's probably just regular water, and I stash it close to the edge of the dance floor because we're kind of going off and on. And so I go and I'll have like an energy bite between every 3 to 5 dances and a few sips of my electrolyte water and that sort of thing. And the difference that made in how I feel going into the next round of dances is incredible. And that was something that is so easy to just, stash under a chair and grab a bite while I'm running back around the other way.
Yeah, absolutely. It can make a tremendous difference. And I'm glad you mentioned the thing about energy bites, because typically in terms of nutrition education, if we're just giving sort of blanket sports nutrition education, what we say is that during dance, or the closer you get to performing or physical activity, you typically want the snack or the meal. Well, it would really be a snack if it's like right before dance, to be mostly carb-based and easy to digest. That being said, depending on the type of dancing, the intensity of the dancing, and in the individual, there are some people who can eat, a full protein bar, or could have cheese and crackers and go on stage. And so it's also listening to your body and what makes you feel best. The carbohydrate portion is really important, but whether, you can include other components with that and how big that snack can actually be is going to vary a lot based on the individual. And we can also train our digestive system to be able to better digest and absorb nutrients, so it's not so uncomfortable. So for a lot of dancers I work with, they don't want to feel full while they're dancing, which is understandable. But knowing that if we can kind of little by little expand what they're doing, their body will get used to it and it'll feel more comfortable. And then, like you, they'll feel much better because they'll be well fueled for, the activity they have to do.
What might be some things let's start with the perspective of the dancer themselves, or maybe the dance educator that's working with them, that might be an indicator of like, I wonder if this person maybe is under fueling a bit.
In terms of things that dancers might notice, I would say energy and stamina is definitely one. Oh, that's what I was going to say, is that because dancers are so good at often denying pain and discomfort, that these things can be going on in the body. And because you sometimes have to do this as a dancer, dancers may be able to disconnect from those uncomfortable feelings. And so we don't always want to just rely on, well, I felt really bad, so now I need to do something about how I'm feeling. We also want to think about, looking at intake, and does it seem like I'm eating regularly? Am I getting my nutrients in, et cetera? In terms of signs and symptoms, so energy, stamina, I think focus and concentration is a big one. So sometimes dancers might notice that they might be making more mistakes or having a harder time picking up choreography. In growing dancers, underfueling can impact growth and development. So if anyone is not growing, gaining weight, experiencing pubertal development as expected for their age, those are all major warning signs. If somebody's falling off their growth charts, major warning sign. I would say weight loss in a child or adolescent is a red flag, because children and adolescents should not be losing weight. They should be gaining weight to support their development into adults. Also, mood can be impacted. So dancers might experience more anxiety, depression, irritability, sleep. When we're not feeling well, it impacts sleep. And that can, then have an effect on so many things, fatigue, mental health, how we fuel ourselves, etc. And I think the other thing that's important to note, and there's a whole host of physical signs and symptoms, it can impact just about every body system. I would say the more outward sign would be changes in menstrual function, either missing a period, not getting a period by your first period by 15, or noticing changes in your cycle, shorter, longer, lighter, heavier. Those are all warning signs. And again, I just lost my train of thought. I was going to say something else about that, but we'll skip that part. It'll come back to me maybe.
Another thing that you had talked about in here too, and I think is an important one, is also thinking about how dancers are nourishing themselves as they're working through injury recovery. Because we know that, we see the science and the research, and we know that injury is a common thing amongst dancers, whether that is something relatively minor, like maybe you tweak your ankle a little bit or whatever, or something that requires surgery, requires significant time off of dance. It can really be a big spectrum. What are some things that folks should maybe know about what happens and what we could be doing during that recovery process?
Yeah, actually, I remember what I was going to say about underfueling, so I just want to go back to that for a second, and then I'll come back and talk about injury. One thing I think that's important to remember, and this actually is related to injury as well, is that there is a reciprocal relationship with underfueling and mental health issues. So I think it's important to remember that even if the cause of underfueling isn't disordered eating, because of the impacts that underfueling can have on the brain, that can be a catalyst to develop disordered eating or an eating disorder. And so we want to be aware of that reciprocal relationship for sure. So another sign of underfueling, for example, could be, more rigidity around food, more anxiety around food, more restrictive behaviors that are noticed, etc. In terms of injury recovery, I think that the number one issue that I see in dancers is underfueling during injury, because of this really intense and understandable, given the pressures of the dance world, fear of weight gain during injury, and getting out of shape, which is going to happen if you are immobile. I think that you're not going to go back in the exact same shape. It takes time to get back there. I mean, I'm talking about if you have like a major time off, surgery, crutches, etc. And I think what lands up happening is, because of the fear of body changes, dancers cut back way too much on what they need to support injury healing. And that in turn affects injury recovery negatively, either prolonging recovery or even preventing full recovery. I think there can be a lot of misconceptions and misunderstanding around nutrition needs during injury. The more serious the injury, actually, the more energy and nutrients your body needs for healing. And so even though you might be dancing less, the amount you need to eat could very well be not any different than it was during dancing, or could even be more than it was when you were dancing, especially if you were in underfueled state or you're on crutches, both of which are going to require, a significant amount of energy. The other piece that I would say that I think because mental and physical health are so linked, is that, and unfortunately, we often kind of view them in these separate buckets, which they are not.
Yeah.
It is as critical to get support around the mental health piece. There's even research showing that dancers who have good coping skills have better injury outcomes.
Mhm.
The dancers really need that support, whether it's professional support, whether it's support from your dance family, your friends. It's really key, because that's also going to help you engage in rehab in the way you need to, nourish and care for yourself in a way that's going to help support the injury recovery.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such an important point, because I know particularly with dancers that have had more significant injuries that have them out of dance for a longer period of time, or have them more restricted in what they can be doing in dance. Sometimes they come to me and it's sort of like there's this loss of part of their identity during that time. And that can be really difficult, or loss of a stress outlet or a creative outlet.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of what I even discuss with them, even though they're there for the physical part of all of it, is let's talk about other things that you like to do. And what are some things, maybe spend more time with friends and family. And, if you like to play games or something like that, or, do you have other artistic things that you enjoy doing? Maybe really spend some time doing the drawing and painting that you enjoy doing, and that kind of stuff. And helping them find those other things really helps them in just their kind of overall perspective on how they're dealing with this injury while they're away from dance for a while.
Absolutely. That's such an important point. I think dance is a part of your identity, and it is not, who you are entirely. And going back, ideally way before injury occurs, we're helping dancers to cultivate those other aspects of their identity, other interests that they have. It can actually make coping with disruptions from dance, much easier to handle, whether it's injury or whether it's maybe a dancer doesn't get selected for a program that all their friends are going to, or retirement. When dance is like your end all be all, of course, injury is devastating anyway, depending on the severity of the injury. But when it feels like, well, who am I if I'm not a dancer? It makes that, so much harder to cope with. And I do think ultimately injury can be a real opportunity for learning, whether it is cultivating those interests and hobbies you didn't have time for with your, full dance schedule, or
Mm-hmm.
whether it's learning about changes you need to make in terms of how you're fueling or your schedule, your mindset, whatever it might be. It can really illuminate, if I want to be healthy and have longevity as a dancer, these are some things I really need to address. And I'm sure I've spent so much time in PT, so I'm sure this as a PT, that it often reveals areas, right, of weakness or imbalance that you can actually come back from the injury with those things addressed and stronger and better than you were before. But that takes time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, a lot of my colleagues in the dance space that are physical therapists, we often have these conversations also of like, we have this opportunity, like you said, to kind of get you back to where you were or even stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, why stop at just enough
Right.
when we can kind of help you take that next step for that longevity and, perhaps a bit more physical resilience in your body and that sort of thing, to be able to just be at that next level when you do return to dance.
Yeah, it's that whole concept of surviving versus thriving, which is applicable to so many different aspects of a dancer's life.
Most definitely. What are some things, kind of going back to the people who are supporting dancers, parents, educators, studio owners, whatever? What are some things that you think would be really beneficial for them to consider when it comes from this nourishing side?
Yeah. I think that language and messaging is one of the most important aspects for everyone. And as I was saying earlier, I think there are some things that, apply across the board. If I had to pick one chapter in my book that everyone in the dance world was required to read, it would be the chapter on language and messaging, because I think that it's not information people are often exposed to. I think that, because of the way dance works with kind of tradition passed down from generation to generation, we just sort of do the same things that, we were taught how to do and create the same environment. And so often dance educators and even parents, we're all exposed to diet culture nonstop, just send the same messages that they were exposed to often, unless they've done some work to really, learn more and question those practices. So I think kind of across the board, considering language around food and bodies and weight is one of the most important things that can be done. Not describing food or eating in a way that's, like I said earlier, the dichotomous approaches, good, bad, healthy, unhealthy, or that passes judgment around how a dancer is eating, what they're eating, how much they're eating. I think generally speaking, no one should be commenting on dancers' food choices, unless they're working with a dietitian. And, it's a collaborative approach on what they might want to improve and change. But I think encouraging optimal fueling on the flip side of that can be really helpful. So dance educators shouldn't be giving out specific nutrition advice unless they've been trained in nutrition, and they're also registered dietitians. But they can, talk to dancers about the importance of fueling and hydrating on breaks. They can kind of, if they're hearing negative food or body talk in the environment, they can nip that in the bud. So I think that's really important. I think the way we speak about bodies is really important. Anything that challenges there's just one type of dancer body to have is really key. So whether that's explicit messaging, like telling dancers to lose weight, or whether that's more implicit, like dancers being in an environment where they only see the thinnest dancers being promoted or getting roles, that sends the same message. On the flip side, having more diversity in terms of ethnicity, gender, body types, that really can help, if dancers see themselves reflected, that can really help them feel more accepted in their dance space. And I think the way we talk about bodies is so key because it has a real influence on body image. And we know that body dissatisfaction is a major contributing factor to the way dancers take care of themselves, and also a major contributing factor to disordered eating and eating disorders.
I love all of those different pieces and things to consider when we're around dancers, supporting dancers. And I think, a couple of things that I've even seen for myself that I think are great examples too are maybe teachers who model some of the behaviors of, I've been teaching for a while, I'm going to have a snack right now, and, make that a norm. Or thinking about one of the studios that I work quite a bit with. And it just dawned on me as you were talking about this, whether they know it or not, I think they set up a good environment for their dancers where you come into this space and they actually have quite a bit of tables with seating. There's a microwave, there's a little vending machine, things like that. It's not only walking in and rooms that are used for dance classes. So it creates this environment where you are invited to sit down, have a snack, drink some water, because there's a water fountain there too, or, a little dispenser of some sort, and that kind of thing. And so often when I'm in that studio, I see dancers sitting and eating out in that space, as opposed to studios where that space is really limited. It's, well, where am I even going to eat? Where can I have food? And the lobby is crammed with people and, all of that sort of thing. And so again, whether they know it or not, I think that is a really brilliant way of setting the dancers up for success with some of that too.
Absolutely. Those are all great examples of, messaging that's sent without saying anything. When you see your parent or your dance educator role model, you know what, I need to take a break and eat before we do this. Or I haven't gone to the bathroom in a really long time. I'm going to start class 2 minutes late, but I need to run to the restroom. I mean, those kinds of things are really important. or even acknowledging, wow, everybody seems really tired today. What's going on, so that we're not just stuffing all that stuff down and ignoring it. And I think the environment piece is really key. So I mentioned kind of scheduling earlier. Is there enough time in the dancers' schedules to eat? I mean, I work with some dancers that professional dancers don't even get a lunch break. It's like they're just expected to find time to squeeze in food, and they never know how long that's going to be or where it's going to come during the day. On the flip side, when you have an hour lunch break and you know when it's going to be, and that time that's been carved out is really respected, it sends the message that, yes, taking care of your body is part of being a successful artist, and we really value that. And so we value this time that we're giving you to nourish yourself. And the tables, microwave, fridge, all of that stuff is really helpful. It just encourages dancers to know, like, yeah, we should be eating in this environment. We're here for 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
There should be a lot of eating events happening in that time frame.
Yeah, exactly. Or I've also heard of some studios where, whether it's on maybe long rehearsal days, recital days, or competition days, where they actually do like a potluck type of thing where it's everybody brings some snacks and foods that you can share with everybody, and we'll have access for all of the dancers there. And so again, you know that you're going to have access to some things when you're there at the event.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing I would love to see from the sports world that has not translated to dance at all is like the training table, where like that stuff is just, they walk out of rehearsal or whatever, and there's a table with all the snacks and things they need to eat to make it easy for them. But we have yet to see that. And I think a big part of that is budget too, the difference in the arts versus the sports world.
Yes, definitely. There are a lot of things I would love to borrow from the sports world that are a little more challenging in the dance space, for sure.
Definitely.
I know we've talked a bit about, like the idea of kind of what is healthy, what is under fueling, and that sort of thing. Let's talk a little bit. I'm going to flip in here to make sure that I'm using the same terminology, or I want to kind of set it up well here. To one of my many tabs that I have.
Nice. I love seeing that.
I'm reading through.
Someone else posted a picture of the book with like 20 tabs in it. I was like, I love seeing that. That was my hope. It would be a resource to kind of go back to again and again. So it's very heartwarming. It was a very grueling 2+ years for writing it. So I love seeing that it is serving the purpose it was intended for.
Yes. And I think to your point there too, I think one of the things that I really appreciate in here as well, as part of that organization, is even things like, some of the tables putting out key points, or at the end of every chapter, you have the main points, which I love the little pun there from the chapter, some notes of like, here's some things to think about and just consider. And then all of your different references, which of course I love to nerd out about, to go like, ooh, where did this come from? I want to go read more about this. So I really appreciate some of that layout, because it does make it so easy to access the information as well.
Thank you. Yeah. The references were a little nutty. It's like, I think it might be like close to 600 or something but it was a little out of control, and it ate way into my word count.
I'm sure. So one of the things that I want to kind of visit here a little bit, and we've touched on a bit, is the idea of eating disorders and disordered eating. For people who maybe have only heard of this, like eating disorders, what is the difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the terms are often used interchangeably, and they're related, but they're not the same thing. I often describe it as these behaviors and this mindset occurring on a spectrum. So on one end, the true healthy end, we have healthy behaviors and a healthy mindset around food and exercise. And then we move into kind of more disordered eating, which might involve dieting or compensatory behaviors around food. So I ate this, now I need to burn it off. Or eating disorder behaviors like purging. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have a clinical eating disorder. I think that the important distinction is that, or the important thing to remember is that disordered eating and eating disorders very often involve many of the same behaviors. It's just that in the disordered eating phase, they're often not happening as frequently. They're maybe not as severe yet, being the key word. And the impact on quality of life is often not quite the same as the eating disorder end of the spectrum. I think some other important things to note are that it's not unusual that dancers will kind of move along the spectrum. So they might be engaging in some disordered eating, and then things get worse, and they might meet criteria for an eating disorder. They might have some recovery, and they're not fully recovered on the healthy end of the spectrum. They have some disordered eating. Another important takeaway is that just because you don't meet all the criteria for an eating disorder does not mean that you shouldn't reach out for help. I think disordered eating can still have a lot of negative impacts on a dancer's health and well-being, and it's an important point of intervention because the earlier we intervene, the greater the chances of full recovery. And so I often, like to promote the idea that if your relationship with food or body or exercise is impacting you in any way negatively whatsoever, to reach out for help, and you deserve help. You don't have to wait until it gets, bad enough, which, unfortunately, I think similarly with injury, dancers are pretty good at like, well, it's not that bad.
Right.
And so our goal is to challenge that and say, could it be better? Do you wish it was better? Are there some ways in which it's affecting you that you wish were different? And if so, let's address it sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm. And I think that goes back to something that we were talking about earlier, this idea of, you don't just need to wait until there's a problem, whatever that means specifically, to work with people like yourself, a dietitian, or myself, a physical therapist. You don't need to wait until you're injured. You don't need to wait until you've been diagnosed with an eating disorder.
Exactly.
Working with a specialist who can help support you early on can just help you with overall performance and how you're feeling and, all of that kind of stuff, and maybe decrease some of the risk of getting injured and prolong your length of career, whatever that means. And so I think that's something that's really important for people to understand too, is just you can go and learn some of the tips and tricks and tools before you feel like you necessarily need them, quote unquote.
Absolutely. I think psychotherapy is the other specialist I would add in there too, just like in terms of the mental health piece. It's also related. And I think, again, not everyone will be able, that won't be accessible to everyone, financially based on where they live, especially if they, want somebody who's dance specific. And so ideally the dance schools and companies are offering at least some general education, which is not the same thing as getting individualized one-on-one care, but it can, be helpful, especially if resources are provided to then follow up with more one-on-one help. Kind of normalizing that, I think, is important too. Yeah, but I agree. I would love to see dancers be focus more on preventative rather than, reactive after the fact.
Yeah. I was just trying to find the right tab for the thing that I wanted to reference. But that's one of the things that I also really like in here too, is like, for example, when you're talking about how we're fueling and some of the different options for things, there's even like a little table of like, okay, for this snack, recommend something like a carbohydrate and a protein. Here are some examples of carbohydrates. Here are some examples of proteins. And then here are some ideas of how you put that together. So maybe it's cheese and crackers, or it's, however you can combine some of those different things. So again, accessibility wise, even if they can't do an individualized plan with a specialist and all of that sort of thing, having some resources to give a little bit of guidance is better than just trying to wing it and figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another reason that I wrote the book, is really wanting to, this is a lot of the work. It's an expansion of the work I've been doing for many, many years, and the education I provide in terms of workshops, which, even if I would like to do it, which I would, go to every single school and company. It's just impossible. And so it's about, getting the information out to a much wider audience in an accessible, affordable way. And the other piece, I think that it's important too, in terms of having the information come from someone who understands the pressures of the dance world, is that presenting the information in a way that's also helping dancers develop a peaceful relationship with food is really important. There's a lot of information out there that unfortunately kind of promotes the more rigid mindset and approaches to food, which I think we really need to be careful with when we're sharing this information with dancers.
Most definitely. So with all of this fantastic information that is in this book, kind of looking ahead, how do you hope that this book would help influence people in the dance world, help shift conversations around dancer wellness and how we're nourishing ourselves?
Ooh, that's a big one. I think that going back to the language and messaging and role modeling, my hope is that reading the book will help people recognize things they might have been saying or doing that are inadvertently causing harm and learn ways to shift those things. I think that could have a tremendous impact in terms of meaningful change in the dance world. A theme that I really come back to again and again in the book is this idea of self-compassion, not just for the people in dancers' lives, but also for dancers, because I really believe parents, teachers, healthcare professionals all want what's best for dancers. I think a lot of it is lack of knowledge or lack of understanding around how and why certain things people are saying and doing in the dance world could potentially cause harm. I think especially when maybe people have had a different experience in the dance world, maybe somehow they escaped relatively unscathed from being exposed to body shaming or the promotion of dieting practices. It can sometimes be hard to zoom out and say, okay, that wasn't my experience, but what might the experience be of someone else exposed to this messaging, so that we're protecting really most dancers, the most vulnerable among dancers. So that, in terms of cultural shift, I think shifting language, messages, practices is key. I think we also really need to all take a moment and consider the biases we have around what dancer bodies should look like, need to look like, what a dancer body is, and what we are willing to sacrifice to have dancers maintain an ideal that is unrealistic and unhealthy for so many. So if we're going to say that a prepubertal body type is the requirement for or the preferred ideal for certain types of dance, there are major consequences that come from that. And I don't think that we can turn a blind eye to it. I don't think it's okay. I think we need to normalize adult bodies in dance. And I think that very often we get so used to seeing something that we don't even question, is this okay? Where did this come from? Is this a value system I want to continue to perpetuate?
Yes, for sure. And I think that's one of the things where, we always talk about the influence of social media as well. And, seeing some things that maybe aren't great practices or great messages, but also seeing some things that are, and being able to see some of these dance companies that are sort of changing that narrative of who are the dancers that make up that company and what do they look like, and how are they presenting themselves, thinking also of some of the big name dancers out there when they're sharing some of the things that they're doing. Like, I always love, here's what I did in physical therapy today, or, here's how I'm recovering from injury and the team that I'm working with to get there, and that kind of stuff. And so I think that's one of the powerful pieces of social media, is now getting to see that all of these things do in fact exist and successful dancers are utilizing them.
Absolutely. And I think one adjunct I would add to that, because again, similarly with social media, I think a lot of people post stuff because they found something that works for them and they want to share that information. I think we need to be really careful with having that message that this worked for me, it'll work for you.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with food, like those what I eat in a day kind of posts.
Yes.
Can we just stop that? Because first of all, it's a super cultivated, we don't even know if that's really what they're doing. And two, you could eat exactly the same thing someone else is eating, have the exact same amount of physical activity, and that doesn't mean you're going to look like them or dance like them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can kind of increase some of the problematic comparison. On the flip side, I do think kind of what you were saying is that when we normalize getting help, I'm going to PT, I have a whole team that's supporting me, I have a dietitian, I have a therapist. And also, I feel like this generation is so much more vocal about things they're not okay with in the dance world. That did not
Mm-hmm.
exist when I was a dancer. And that's huge. I mean, there have been a lot of dancers that have, really bravely come forward and talked about their experiences with body shaming. And, we need to be talking about it. And we need to take dancers' lived experiences really to heart. Because it's not one isolated person. It's a lot of people. A lot of people are having the same experience. We need to really evaluate the impact of the environment.
Yeah. And thinking of that, going back to something you were saying just a minute ago too, within some of what you have in this book, there are sort of check-in points for people who are reading where maybe they've been around a certain culture around these topics, or they themselves have said some of the things where, we're kind of saying, maybe some of this messaging could be a little differently, but acknowledging it is okay. Check in with yourself, see maybe where you learned this, what are some ways that you can change what it is that you're doing, and that kind of stuff. And so it promotes this idea of the reader, even if they're feeling, like, oh, I did something that wasn't great because, I'm learning to do something different now, that is okay too, and to be gentle with themselves through all of that.
Absolutely. I mean, we're all human. We're all going to make mistakes. I specialize in this area and I still make mistakes. I think that it can be a point of acknowledgement and healing when, you do say something or do something that in hindsight you realize was not really helpful. Yeah, I think that self-compassion, being gentle with ourselves is so key to helping us stay open. I think otherwise, if even if the blame is coming from ourselves, that self-blame can really kind of close the door to change, reflection and change. And so I think, if we can be like, all right, that was not great and it's okay. I didn't know better. I know better now. And this is how I'm going to work to shift it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think this is a good opportunity for a special segment on the show. So on every episode of Dance Med Spotlight, we have the final bow, essentially the take-home message. We've talked about so many different things. What is maybe one or two things that you hope someone listening walks away with?
I think that I would say that I know for me, and I know for many of us who work in this field, dance is such a gift. It has given me memories and friendships, and it feeds my soul still. And it's such a huge part of who I am, though not my whole identity. And I think that unfortunately, there are also a lot of detrimental aspects that exist in much of the dance world. And so what I would like to see change is that we can hang on to all of the beauty and gifts that dance gives all of us who do it and those who view it, while we work to change those harmful aspects. And I think it is possible. And I think that it will take all of us with some courage to be able to kind of look at our past and really evaluate the consequences of how things have been done, and, kind of bravely set about on a new path, which people are already doing. Change is happening. It is possible.
Yeah.
So that would be my main takeaway, I think.
I love that. Last and certainly not least, the shameless plug. So here is your opportunity to promote anything that you want to promote or shout out or whatever. So have at it.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. So I don't think we mentioned this in the beginning, but so I'm based in New York City, which is where I would say probably the majority of my clients are in New York for one-on-one counseling. But based on licensure laws throughout the country, I do work with people in other locations. I also happen to be licensed in Florida and randomly in New Hampshire, but can work with people in other states too. So for one-on-one counseling and more information about like consulting services, I also offer supervision for clinicians. So if you don't have a lot of experience working with dancers or with eating disorders or disordered eating, and you want to do some case consultation or just kind of feel more skilled or confident in working with this population, I offer that service. And you can learn more about everything I do, including the variety of dancer workshops that I offer on my website, which is msnutrition.com. The workshops are a huge part of what I do. So I have Head to Point is kind of the blanket name. And I have workshops for dancers, for educators, for parents, for healthcare professionals on a variety of the topics that are covered in the book and that we talked about today. And then the book you can get at any of your major booksellers. Please read it. I'm really hopeful that it can make a meaningful difference in the dance world. If you do read it, leave a review on Amazon. Those reviews really help get the book just seen by people who it's written for. So I'd be grateful if you could do that.
So thank you so much for your time today and for talking through all of this.
Thank you so much for having me. I know it took us a little while to get here, but I'm so excited we could finally do this. I really appreciate you giving me this platform to kind of share a bit more about what I do.
Dance Med Spotlight is hosted and produced by Alyssa Arms. We discuss all things dance medicine. This has been another episode from Dance Med Spotlight. The Dance Med Spotlight is intended for educational purposes only. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present.